Like, I'm a 44-year-old, middle-aged woman who lives in country Victoria, and because I'm a feminist, I'm suddenly terrifying. I mean, that's kind of flattering. But the bigger issue is looking at disenfranchisement. People aren't disenfranchised. If you're being sold that it's feminism, a movement for equality that's never thrown a bomb, that's never picked up a gun, that's disenfranchising you.
A movement for equality who has never thrown a bomb, has never picked up a gun. Yes, she really does believe that. That's because, like the overwhelming majority of feminists, she follows narratives, choosing her facts selectively to arrive at the conclusion she wants. Here is where your education begins, Van. Let's deal with the equality myth first. Feminists don't want equality. They want 50% of board members, but not 50% of sewer cleaners. 50% of journalists, but not 50% of refuse collectors. And it's always a man's fault whenever a woman does something wrong. This applies especially to any kind of criminal activity. Here is a very short clip from an Australian film called Criminalising Women. Listen to the victim narrative.
Women's prisons are filled with stories of people like me, so people that have had trauma, abuse, really violent relationships, and I said to the girls actually this last time, I said, you know, we're actually pretty lucky that we get to jail, because a lot of women don't even get here. A lot of women are killed through domestic violence. A lot of women are broken and are in prison in their own house.
That's never thrown a bomb, that's never thrown a bomb.
I'm now going to show you clips from two different presenters. The first is Andrew Marr, not my favourite person, but he has some interesting insights into first wave feminism, the so-called suffragette movement. Ask yourself what would have happened to men if they had spat on police officers and assaulted them. The second person is Simon Webb, a fairly little known historian who deserves to be much better known. This guy's work is absolutely incredible. Check out his website and his books, but here he's talking about also the suffragettes and the bombs Van Badham would have you believe no feminist has ever thrown.
Police ordered them to act like ladies. In response, Christabel spat at the policeman and started to hit them. Exasperated, the police bundled both of them outside onto the street. It was proving a little harder to get arrested than Christabel had imagined. So again, she spat at the officers and hit them. And this time, they were arrested. "Never mind," said Annie Kenny, "we've got what we wanted." "Yes," said Christabel, "I wanted to assault a policeman." They were convicted and offered the choice of prison or a fine, and they chose prison. Annie Kenny went to Manchester's Strangeways prison for 3 days. Christabel Pankhurst for 6.
Emily Davison detonated the first terrorist bomb to go off in Britain in the 20th century. In 1913, Chancellor of the Exchequer Lloyd George was having a house built in Surrey. In the early hours of 19th of February, Emily Davison, together with a couple of other suffragettes, planted a bomb in the house which practically destroyed it. This was no lone wolf or maverick attack. Emmeline Pankhurst, leader of the suffragettes, was tried at the Old Bailey a couple of months later and sent to prison for 3 years for inciting terrorism for her role in the attack. Emily Davison decided to take the activities of the suffragettes to a new level by using arson, the first time this had been used in Britain in the 20th century as a political weapon. On the 8th of December 1911, she posted some burning rags in the letterbox of Fleet Street Post Office, and a few days later set fire to 2 pillar boxes by the same means. Other suffragettes joined in and started setting fire to letters, and in retrospect we tend to regard this as being a bit of a harmless jape, a little vandalism, but there was a good deal more to it than that. In addition to burning rags, the suffragettes were pouring concentrated sulphuric acid into pillar boxes and sending glass bottles of phosphorus through the post. A number of postmen had their hands burned when they were emptying pillar boxes by acid, and some postal workers' lungs were damaged by burning phosphorus when the bottles broke in the sorting office. Indeed, in one case, a mail train actually caught fire when a suffragette incendiary device went off, and one of the workers there was quite seriously injured by the fire. Arson was attracting more attention than broken windows, and so inevitably the habit spread. The Church of England, for example, was not wholly in favour of votes for women, and so setting fire to churches became the next tactic in the arson campaign. Other buildings were also burned down, including restaurants and railway stations. Combined with arson, a new method emerged, that of planting bombs. The day after Mrs. Pankhurst was convicted at the Old Bailey of complicity in bombing, a bomb was found outside the Bank of England in London. Luckily, a policeman managed to throw it in a nearby fountain and stopped it from exploding, but afterwards the bombs came thick and fast. The targets ranged from St Paul's Cathedral in London to the Liverpool Cotton Exchange, from a greenhouse in Manchester to Westminster Abbey in London. Some of the bombs very nearly killed people. For example, one was set off in a railway station in Liverpool. Another one destroyed the Cactus House in Alexandra Park in Manchester. An explosion even took place at Roslin Chapel, the church in Scotland made famous in the book and film The Da Vinci Code. Another one went off at St Martin's in the Field Church in Trafalgar Square, showering passers-by with broken glass in the late evening. Some of the attacks were very serious. 2 charges of dynamite were set off outside Holloway Prison, and they caused the windows in nearby houses to shatter, spreading shards of glass over the beds of sleeping children. The arson attacks were getting worse as well. Shortly after the bomb at Holloway Prison, the Royal Dockyards in Portsmouth were attacked and set on fire. 2 men died as a result.
That was first wave feminism, the suffragette movement. The second wave was the misnamed Women's Liberation Movement. If you haven't heard of the Scum Manifesto, here is its author. Shooting somebody, like Van Badham says feminists have never done. By the way, this book isn't satire, and for the record, Andy Warhol was a homosexual, which hardly makes him a member of the patriarchy, does it?
June 3rd, 1968, 50 years ago today. The day pop artist Andy Warhol was confronted by a radical feminist named Valerie Solanas. Just the year before, Solanas had published a manifesto which called, among other things, for thrill-seeking women to eliminate the male sex. An occasional actress in Warhol's films, Solanas accused him of losing a copy of a play she'd written. On that fateful day, she cornered the pop artist in his New York studio, which was known as the Factory. We'll let the police explain what happened next.
After a brief conversation, she drew a weapon and fired and shot Mr. Warhol. And then with the gun, she exited by way of the elevator, and she's disappeared up to the present time.
Warhol was rushed to a hospital where he almost died. Solanas was arrested in Times Square a few hours later. The shooting, needless to say, was a tabloid sensation. Solanas was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ultimately diagnosed with schizophrenia. As for Andy Warhol, he survived, but was scarred both physically and emotionally for the rest of his life. Warhol died in 1987 at the age of 58. Valerie Solanas died the next year at age 52. Her 15 minutes of fame long since faded into obscurity.
Returning to the clip by Andrew Marr, what kind of sentence do you think 2 men would have got for spitting repeatedly on police officers and assaulting them? 3 days and 6 days like those 2? What kind of sentence do you think a man would have got for shooting a woman and nearly killing her? as Solanas did to Warhol. 3 years. Incidentally, for younger viewers, the reference at the end to 15 minutes of fame, Andy Warhol was a man who said that in the future everybody will be famous for 15 minutes. It is true that third wave feminism does not generally resort to violence. They prefer intimidation from behind the scenes, like a certain other lobby I won't mention. And some feminists, like this woman, Julie Bindel, and her lover, Harriet Wistrick, believe women should be able to get away with murder. And to date they've enabled several to do so. So Van, take a good look at feminism. Not what it claims to be, not what it purports to be, but what it really is.